I'm approaching the settlement now.
Jamie blew out an amused breath. You know I can see your camera feed, right? She knew that planet-side, Malcolm, was narrowing his eyes. Of course, no one could see his expression, but he and his partner were so in sync that it often felt like she was beside him at all times. An almost codependent controller-surveyor team. Jamie and Malcolm had experienced moderate success, but this mission could make or break them.
I forgot. No rules, no redundancy measures with you vagabonds. You know, back in the Colonial Star Division, we did things a certain way because it was safer and...
Well, you're not with Star Division anymore, are you? You're with the Salvage Division, and we're a little looser on the lead, my darling. Jamie could hear Malcolm mumbling, and she smiled to herself fondly, kicking back in her captain's chair, scuffed-up boots on the dash of the hauler. It was a rock-solid ship, but it was also older than she herself was, so she wasn't overly concerned about the patina of the whole thing. The galaxy was peaceful, almost to a fault at this point, and for years now, try-hard soldier boys like Malcolm had been getting kicked down to be more substantial, less than flashy portions of colonial military. Jamie hadn't been overly thrilled with getting assigned a stuffy ex-cadet, but surprisingly, he hadn't turned out to be all that bad. The two of them had been working together for 3 years now, and while they hadn't made any significant findings on their own, they brought in enough scrap to keep their contract active. Members of the Salvage Division all dreamed of finding something monumental, maybe a form of alien life or a planet covered in potable water, and retiring early off the recurrent bonuses. But that was a rarity in Jamie's corner of the galaxy. Still, the almost symbiotic relationship she had built with her partner was worth more than gold, silver, or even water. While she would never admit it to him, Jamie knew that the thing between them lacked any accurate description. They just were. It was why, when looking at the screen, where the feed from Malcolm's camera was shown, she knew exactly what he was feeling. Nervousness, excitement, trepidation, and knowing Malcolm, a healthy dose of self-satisfied cockiness. Jamie hated to admit it, but despite her relaxed posture, she really hated this assignment. Fion OEH6 had been marked as a planet of interest. Not for anything too exciting, but as a source of potential mineral mining. It wasn't until Jamie had sent back the preliminary scans of the Fion that she had received word back from her superiors that there was an odd structural cluster that was consistent with some sort of ruins they had found on other planets, and they wanted her and her partner to investigate that before anything else. She had bit her tongue, not wanting to rain on Malcolm's parade when he had been so obviously excited to have something new to do for once. But Jamie couldn't muster up any emotions besides reluctance. Humanity had not made first contact yet. Not really. But as their reach spanned wider and wider away from Earth, they began to find hints of intelligent life, in the form of ruins, scattered throughout the Milky Way. A spacefaring race lost to time. But if humanity had long been obsessed with the thing that had long since passed from reality, whether it be dinosaurs, proto-humans, or in this case, extraterrestrials. And since Fion OEH6 had just been a trace mineral assignment anyway, examining a new potential ancient settlement took top priority. Jamie wouldn't speak it out loud. Spacefarers were a superstitious lot, after all. But the ruins all gave her the heebie-jeebies. She had managed to avoid any of them thus far. But that ended today. On the screen, Jamie watched the borders of the settlement come into view for Malcolm. His entire field of vision was covered in stone spires, the smallest of which appeared to be around 20 feet tall, and the largest, tall enough that Malcolm couldn't see the tops of them through the ominous cloud cover. The spires weren't broad, either, only about the width of a grown man's wingspan, sprinkled around the landscape, sparsely in some areas and as close as trees in an earth forest in others, like the one Malcolm was in now. While the satellite overlay indicated that he was close to the ruins themselves, neither Jamie nor Malcolm could see anything but a sea of gray stone pillars, shale heavy dirt, and the never-ending blanket of off-white fog. Fion was a wholly unpleasant planet, but based on its similarities to other worlds that had ended up being mineral deposit hotspots, There had been a lot of hope for this garbage rock to be bursting at the seams with lithium. Before the scans had gotten them stuck, playing archaeologist, it had been completely unremarkable. Now, though, the endless dull sea in Malcolm's vision was making her uneasy in some weird primal part of her, and she was afraid it would affect her ability to guide her partner safely. From where Jamie sat, she could see everything, including the things that Malcolm couldn't. The video feed was the most obvious, but Malcolm was also connected to an overly delicate medical monitoring system, complete with a pulse oximeter, heart rate monitor, and a slew of devices that gave her other metrics, including his rates of respiration and brainwave function. When Jamie had first been certified as a controller, part of a controller-surveyor team, all the medical terminology felt like it was going to make her brain explode. But with practice, she had gotten the hang of it. She was familiar with Malcolm, including the way his readings looked. She wasn't sure if it would be the same if she would ever be assigned another surveyor, but that was a thought for another time. The atmosphere on Phaon was sparse, but the air on the ground was horrifically humid, stemming from the extremely salty seas near the equator, and a thick, soupy fog hung over everything at all times. Cloud cover was so heavy that the anemic light from the system's stars couldn't reach through to burn any of it off. From what she could tell, her partner could only see a few feet in front of him. Jamie sat back up, leaning towards the screen as if it would help her feel better. "Hey," she said, breaking their silence. "Be careful."
Come on now, you know me. Careful is my middle name.
"Bullshit," Jamie scoffed, keeping her concern out of her voice as she watched him wade through the fog. Unseen by her partner, Jamie pressed her hand against her chest, over her own galloping heart, glad that her partner couldn't read her vitals. "Just be safe, you jerk. Come back to me in one piece."
Say, Jay, you don't seem very excited for our first mission that doesn't involve sniffing dirt samples. Malcolm could almost sense his partner's annoyed expression through the slight crackle of their comm line.
"Yeah, because I'm not."
He was excited, though. Phaon 0EH6 wasn't much to behold from orbit, but with his feet in the dirt, Malcolm couldn't keep his cool. It almost felt like some long-dead, burned-out forest, except instead of petrified wood, it was nothing but stone. It would have been different if there had been intelligent life here at one point, but some cataclysm had turned this place into a haunting wasteland. It made him feel like he was a little kid, entering a haunted house for the first time, not knowing what was around the next corner. Where's your sense of adventure, Jay?
"Right here with me on the ship. Less talking, more walking, please."
The ruins rose up out of the fog, dust on the ground barely stirring as he walked through them, leaving the prints of his boots behind him as he went. All the remnants of the structures were a mess of crumbled stone. No signs of civilization besides the buildings themselves. It was a desolate sight, but one that mirrored the other sparse ruins that had been discovered around the galaxy. Frustratingly, there was never anything to find besides the stone buildings. No art, no signs of life like cooking fires, utensils, or even organic remains. It was like a puzzle full of missing pieces. There was obviously something bigger at work in these ancient settlements, but it seemed almost impossible to decipher if all that was left was rocks. Malcolm turned his head this way and that, letting his camera pick up every bit of the settlement, wandering between the buildings and filling sample vials with scrappings from various pieces of the ruins. He could hear Jamie's breathing over the comms, steady and sure, and it kept him even-keeled. Occasionally, she would give him instructions. "Go left 4 meters ahead. Can you get a better look at that structure?" Or, "Be cautious, there is a sudden dip in the terrain up ahead." And her matter-of-fact tone allowed him to be as clinical as possible about the whole thing. There was something about the ruins that made him feel as if he was on the edge of panic, even when this was something he had been hoping for throughout his entire career. He was thrilled to be doing what he was doing, but the pressing silence of the place combined with the monotone color of the landscape and the fact that this place was a literal extraterrestrial ghost town made his skin crawl. He and Jamie needed this, though. He had to do a perfect job if he wanted to elevate the two of them out of their scavenger duty and onto more serious projects. He couldn't slip up, even a little bit, because they were at a disadvantage for more fulfilling work, even if there wasn't an obvious reason for it. Jamie hadn't noticed yet how many shit jobs they received, but Malcolm had his theories. As he stepped over a broken down wall and into one of the structures, there was suddenly a squeal of feedback on his communication speaker, followed by the low buzz of static. He nearly jumped out of his skin before trying to contact the ship. Jamie? I'm getting some major feedback here. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
She replied, but her voice was distorted by the static.
Your heart is racing. Are you alright?
Yeah, this place isn't easy on my nerves, I have to admit. She huffs softly.
Yeah, same.
He tried to put the static to the back of his mind, despite it buzzing in his ears constantly as he walked through the building. It was the most complete construct in the settlement, and the weak light coming in from the broken down wall he had entered from was barely enough to show him the way. Again, he was unsettled by the lack of anything that spoke of life besides the building itself. There was no artwork, no decorations, no discarded books or signs that anyone had lived here. It was just more empty, blank walls.
This is great, Malcolm. We're going to get such a bonus.
Jamie breathed. Mm-hmm, he murmured distractedly.
Do you think we'll ever get more interesting work after this? I don't have a problem with the simple stuff, but I know you have high expectations. I don't know why we get passed up every time anyway. Our success rate is...
I know why, he interrupted, grimacing and shaking his head to try and dispel the headache all the feedback and static was causing.
Oh, of course you do know it all. Why then?
He closed his eyes for a second and imagined her sitting in her captain's chair, maybe spinning it in a circle like a school kid as she spoke to him. She'd probably be wearing one of the old flight suits with the name of some crew member that had flown on their salvage ship many moons ago. Scuffed black boots on her feet and her long red hair piled in a haphazard mass on top of her head. It made a flush of warmth bloom in his chest, and for a second, the fear and nausea that this place was building in him was pushed away by the light of her. He wasn't sure if she even knew. Come on, Jamie, don't be dense, he chuckled self-consciously.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Think about it for a second. The teams that get the best jobs, why do you think we're better than they are? She hummed as she thought about it.
They all seem to tolerate each other at best, and despise each other at worst. We're a lot more in sync, so obviously we're the better team.
He interrupted her again, kicking up dust as he turned in a circle. His headlamp had caught a glimmer further back in the building, and he headed that way as he spoke. Would you let me die out here for a discovery? What if it was like a 50-50 chance? We could make some insane discovery that would make us go down in history, but if we misjudged, I'd die. How would you guide me through it?
I wouldn't,
she said simply. And therein lies the problem, Malcolm said, not sure whether her answer was a relief or a burden. The teams that succeed take the risk because they value success over each other. We're too careful because, well, I guess we're fond of each other, you know? Jimmy was silent for long seconds until she uttered a single...
Oh.
That one syllable said she had realized something about herself that she hadn't known before. Malcolm wanted to dig into that "oh," peel away the layers of it, but now wasn't the time. They'd have time later. They'd have all the time. He didn't say anything either as he made his way through the empty structure. Static ebbed and flowed through the speakers in his ears, interrupted by beeps and drones of feedback. And as he got closer to the glimmer, it almost seemed to be a pattern. Malcolm didn't focus on it, though, suddenly wanting to be done and back in the lander that would take him back to the ship.
Hey, Malcolm, the camera feed is starting to fuzz up. Are you about done in there? Something's messing with my readings up here.
Hey, yeah, I just need to check this one last thing, he assured her, finally reaching the glimmer buried in the gray dust. He had expected a tool, maybe a piece of metal used in building or a button from a shred of clothing. Instead, as he brushed the dust away, he realized the glimmer was a handle to a door that was built into the floor. And as he uncovered more of it, to his shock, he realized it was made of a soft, rotting wood.
What the fuck?
Jamie breathed. This was a town of rock, on a world of stone, and a wooden door made absolutely no sense. The hissing and the rumbling in his ears had reached a fever pitch, and when he wrapped his hand around the handle, it felt like the sound was piercing his brain.
Leave.
His partner blurted out, her voice shaky.
Something doesn't feel right. Just come back. We'll have them send out a more experienced group. You've done enough.
I want to at least see what it is, he retorted, beginning to pull.
Your heart is racing and your respirations are off the charts. I'm commanding you to come back, Malcolm.
There was real fear in her voice, and he almost hesitated, but he was so close. Malcolm was being pulled in so many different directions. Glory and a chance to rise above his disappointing appointment with the salvage team. The muffled demands of his partner, the churning fear from the animal part of his mind, and the strange sounds coming from his communications unit that almost seemed to encourage him to move forward. At this point, he could barely hear Jamie over the cacophony, and the wood of the door handle was so warm and inviting, even through his spacesuit gloves. I don't know what you're saying, Jay, but I'm just going to take a quick look and then I'll head back to the lander, I swear. He could hear her raise her voice, but it was lost in the static. As he tugged the hatch open, he was surprised by how light the whole thing was, and he was able to throw the door aside to reveal what was beneath. By the light of his headlamp, Malcolm peered into the darkness, revealing, to his disappointment, a set of 5 stairs that led into what looked like water. A fully flooded chamber, dark water rippling in the updraft caused by the door being pulled open, and nothing else. If he hadn't been in a helmet, he was sure it would have smelled damp and mildewy, but all he could go off of was what he could see. It almost looked like an old basement back on Earth, with the pockmarked stone walls and stairs, but the illusion was quickly broken by the flood inside of it. Jamie, are these suits rated for underwater exploration? He asked, absent-mindedly, but he had no idea what she replied. Besides that, it sounded desperate, almost like a sob. He looked over his shoulder, as if someone might be watching him, before taking the first step into the underground chamber, thinking that if he could just get a closer look, it would show him what was under the water. The static and feedback wasn't even bothering him anymore, but Jamie's voice, ranging from rage to terror, was making him feel like shit. In a fit of impulsiveness, he jerked his head to the side, tucking his chin against his shoulder until he was able to grab the small cord that connected the comms unit in his ears to the rest of the suit with his teeth. And with another jerk of his head, he was able to pull it out of both of his ears. Jamie's voice and the static disappeared, but nothing else did. With a start, he realized the bursts of feedback that had sounded more and more like voices as he went weren't coming from the comms unit. Instead, it was coming from outside the glass of his helmet, appearing to originate from deep within the flooded chamber. As if in a trance, he took another step down the stairs, and then another, until his boots broke the surface of the water, and the thrum of the voices echoed in his very bones. He felt almost drunk as he smiled, taking another step so that the water was at his waist. Jamie was screaming so loud he could hear her coming from the earbuds that hung down by his neck, but he ignored her, because above all of it, he could hear the thrumming feedback calling his name.
Malcolm. 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 Malcolm.
Malcolm! Her breaths were interspersed with terrified sobs as she typed furiously on the control panel, desperately trying to keep all the monitoring systems from crashing. One by one, they went down. Ugly red X's on the panel screen as she lost every ounce of contact she had with her partner. Bit by bit. Communications feed, offline. Video feed, offline. Arc Sense life monitoring system, offline. Fuck! Jamie screamed, fury cutting through her panic, eyes whipping between the 2 open windows on her screen, one where she was trying to reboot her crashing network, and the other waiting on a response from the colonial military home base. She moved in a flurry, but it wasn't fast enough. Life support systems, offline. She slammed a fist into the console, but before she could repeat the motion, the window with the home base chat pinged with a response to her digital cry for help. Salvage ship E58. Our readings indicate major malfunctions coming from your ship's network and monitoring systems for your Surveyor. We're going to perform a remote shutdown and restart. Stand by. Wait! She started to type. I've already... The entire ship went dark. Only the dull sound of the engines running, breaking up the silence. She lowered her head into her hands and waited for the restart. Precious seconds and minutes bleeding away, while God knew what was happening to her partner. The video feed had gone haywire by the time Malcolm had started to walk down into that dark underground chamber. But the flickering, clear images that she could make out had made her want to vomit. He was going underwater, and he couldn't hear her anymore. Jamie had never felt more helpless in her life. Finally, with a loud click, and the sound of dozens of electronics powering up, the lights of the ship came back on, and Jamie sat forward quickly, eyes glued to the screen on her console. All of the communications and monitoring systems were still dark. But there was something happening on a separate area of the ship's electronics array. It was the control system for the lander, and when Jamie rolled her chair down to it, she was shocked to see that it had launched, and she was headed back towards the ship. It felt like a bucket of cold water had been thrown over her. Her mind raced as she rushed back over to the monitoring system console. Those angry red X's were still next to every one of them. Except for the comm system, in place of the ominous offline. It now read, booting. She had thrown the headset to the side when everything had gone down in a fit of frustration. But now she shoved it back onto herself as fast as she could, ignoring the pieces of hair that got caught in it as she did so. Malcolm! Malcolm, come in! It's me! It's Jamie, can you hear me? The horrible, churning, deep but distorted sound that she had heard right before she lost contact was blessedly gone. And on the other end of the line, she could only hear a subtle electrical hum. She had just opened her mouth to call out to him again when he spoke.
Jamie, I'm coming back to the ship.
His tone was clipped and monotone, but it was him. Thank God it's him! Her eyes darted to the health monitors, which were still offline. Are you okay? I lost you there for a while. A lump found its way into her throat, and she swallowed hard against it. I thought I had lost you.
I am on my way back. Let me in when I get there.
He sounded like he was in shock. Malcolm, I'm not getting any readings on you, and your video feed is still down. Are you injured?
You're concerned.
She frowned. Of course I am! I thought you had died, idiot!
I didn't. Let me in when I get there.
She shivered, and she wasn't sure why. How the hell did you make it back to the lander so fast? Those pillars were a maze, and we had to land you so far away.
I knew where I was going. It was simple. Are you still concerned, Jamie?
You're sort of weirding me out. She was distracted, fingers racing across the keyboard again as she tried to force all the other systems online. Something told her that Malcolm was hurt, either out of sorts or in genuine shock, and she wouldn't be able to relax until she saw that his vitals were steady. It wasn't a long trip from the surface to the ship, and after numerous failed attempts at even getting a single monitor to work, she realized that she would probably have him back on deck before she could reliably get anything back online. Can you try and check everything from your end? She asked. I'm getting absolutely nothing over here.
No.
What? Why not?
It's not necessary.
We just had a nearly catastrophic failure on this mission, Malcolm. I think it's pretty necessary.
It's not necessary.
He sounded almost robotic. It was Malcolm's voice, but there was no warmth, no familiarity. Jamie pursed her lips, but there was nothing else to do but wait. In her mind, she thought that it was possible he had been traumatized by the experience, and after he was safely back on board, he wouldn't sound like an empty husk anymore. She closed her eyes, leaning back in her chair and settling in to just wait. There wasn't much else to do. Malcolm knew the steps to take after the lander had docked, but he was so out of it she decided to remind him, just in case. Don't forget to put your suit in the decontamination pod and let yourself be decontaminated in the airlock before coming back in. I don't feel like sanitizing the entire ship because you brought weird germs back.
It's not necessary.
Her eyes shot open, and goosebumps bloomed on her skin as weariness crept up her spine. Yes it is. What's wrong with you?
Have you missed me?
What kind of question is that, Malcolm? She stopped, as a series of beeps sounded from the console, and finally, after hours, all of the statuses from the other monitoring systems had changed from offline to booting. She stopped talking, waiting anxiously for them to come online. Life support systems, online. ArcSense life monitoring system, online. Checking. Blood pressure 0. Respiration 0. Heart rate 0. Neural activity not detected. Patient status, deceased. She stared at the screen in mute horror, acid rising in her throat. She felt like she was going to vomit. Jamie swiveled to reopen the contact window for home base, hands shaking, but before she could touch the keys, the telltale hiss and clicks of the lander docking with the ship echoed throughout the cabin. It should have taken 30 minutes for him to remove his suit and complete decontamination. But once the lander had fully docked, the lights around the hatch quickly turned from red to green. And Jamie didn't even have the time to stand before the manual hand wheel on the door began to turn. The pressure released in a hiss as the door opened. She screamed.